I would like to start by introducing Jacob Thage, who is the director of the Museum Jorn in Silkeborg in Denmark, and who was the one who sort of started this exhibition. He came to me at some reception in Copenhagen and told me that he had gotten this very surprising suitcase a short time before, and it contained lino blocks from Asger Jorn's youth, and he asked if we would be helpful in actually making prints of them, since most of them had no existing.
And now I have to talk. I'm very sorry,
yeah.
Because your reaction was 19, 20 euro Asger Jorn. Yes, of course. And I was very enthusiastic because I've seen everything. Let us see what we can do. It's not impossible. We're very busy. You know how it is. And then, of course, we brought them, and he called me and oh, fantastic! This is amazing! Like, when did you say that? I told you. So I'm sorry. Yes.
No, I wasn't that uninterested, but yes, sometimes works from very, very young artists is not, might not be at all yet. But anyway, I saw the blocks later, and once we started printing them, they kind of started coming alive. It's quite obvious that he picked up really, really quickly. He was 19 when the first ones were made, and he was 25 when the last ones were made, but there are only like maybe a handful that are kind of amateurs. And some of them were made as illustrations for the Boy Scout magazine of Silkeborg, but it's like little vignettes, like a pine cone. It's about a few millimeters. That's just been used as a little typographical thing in the vignette. So in the end, there was this body of work that was actually quite alive and quite fresh, and a great sort of testament to the time they were made in. They were made in very tumultuous times, from 29 to 23 or up to 33.
From 33
and
almost
to 39. So I sort of fell in love with them. We all did in the print shop, and we talked to Jacob and talked about maybe making a small edition of a selection of them, and of course you would make like a complete set in some copies so the museum could have them and they could give some to other collections. But I think you should tell maybe a little bit about the circumstances of the suitcase.
From the real world, the life of the museum director. Yes, because it's a beautiful story initially, because it was one of these days. We all know them. Have a lot of emails to answer, a lot of phones, and it's not that fun. All of it. Our reception calls me, asks me to come out because the nephew of Asger Jorn is standing there and has a suitcase with him. He wants to talk to me. And of course the family does have some priority. We feel obliged to respond whenever they want to talk to us. Mostly came out, and the moment I came out, he didn't see me, but I saw him, and next to him was the suitcase. And that immediately triggered the alarm with me, because it was an old suitcase, definitely 40s, 50s. And that reminded me of something I'd heard from the story of the archives of Jorn, because Asger Jorn was a collector also, somehow. Not only did he give this amazing collection to the small town where he grew up, this collection of 5,500 works by 350 different artists, really unique collection of international quality. But he also, at some point, started collecting every letter, everything, paper, which was connected to the art groups or the artists he had met, the people he was discussing with, which was everything from nuclear physicists, Niels Borch, and so on, and others. And most of these pieces are in the museum today. But of course, he led a very difficult life. I mean, he was traveling all the time. Many of these paintings are so-called taxi size because he had to roll them and put them on his arm into the taxi, and the next day he would turn up in Paris or Milan and Munich or whatever. And so he collected everything in a suitcase, and from time to time he would leave a suitcase with a full suitcase with letters, prints, and other things, with friends all around. That was before the museum came to be in the late 1950s. And slowly all the suitcases found their way to the museum and was included in the museum. Some disappeared, some of the old girlfriends felt that he owed them, so they kept the suitcases, which was the destiny of a couple of them, unfortunately. But most of them ended up in Silkeborg, and suddenly there was a suitcase. I mean, my heart was here. I have some kind of imagination, and of course thought, what is happening there? The nephew of Jorn had lived in Silkeborg, stayed in Silkeborg all his life. His father was Jorn's brother, but I never heard anything that they also had a suitcase. But he went into my office and I couldn't get my eyes away from the suitcase. Hello. And then, of course, immediately he said, let's get on to it, open it. And there's no reason to wait for that. And I opened it up and it was full of these, and now, I'm sorry, I'm a museum person, I should wear white gloves, but I'm sure they have been used recently also. And there were all these lino pieces, all mounted on, what do you call it? This material?
That's chipboard, I think.
Yeah. And I could immediately see that those were never seen before. Counted them, I think it was 52. I mean, it was a totally new chapter of Asger Jorn's oeuvre that suddenly was in this suitcase. And the story was that Jorn, as with all the other suitcases, had left it with a family member at some point, but the brother who sometimes needed more money as a school teacher, probably at some point thought that perhaps he could mount them and then make prints from them and make a lot of money. He got wiser probably and put them in the basement in his house, which is placed, he died now, but it was 500 meters away from the museum. Oh. So in a basement there, this suitcase ended up that at some point he did experiments with the prints, but they were never published. And everybody forgot about them. When he died, the family in the house was sold. Only a few days before the new owner would take over, the son of the brother said, "Oh, there was a suitcase somewhere, wasn't there?" And they went down and they found it. And this was this suitcase, which now you see the results of Niels' hard work there. It was simply amazing. It was a revelation because a few of them were known. A few of them were known because of this naked woman who was one of the first women that Jorn got a little closer to. You can see the communist symbol. She was a communist, and he, at a very early point, started writing letters to her, telling what was happening, because she moved out of Silkeborg at a very early point, and he probably was in love. She was a little more mature, so he could also tell the secrets of his life, his dreams, and we have a very few letters preserved from her. Also, with some, I think 2 or 3 of the prints were known from letters to her. He made proof prints. And this is more or less how it was included. We were then allowed to keep the plates, and yes, you know the rest of the story. And yes, this was very enthusiastic. He called me and said, you know, this you could really see how Jorn develops as a young artist. It's something really so unique because Jorn is and printing is a very important chapter. Jorn as a printer, I think is unique because he always attended the printing. It was always there. It was a process that he did together with these master printers that he engaged with over the years. So from a very early point, you see that something is happening, and rightly, as Niels says, there is something unique about this process that he does. From the very early start to the very late, wonderful Japanese print-inspired works that he did. He worked with printers in Paris, this Bramsen and Claude, where he made a lot of things. And I've also spoken to some of the printers who said he was a nightmare to work with. No, they hated when he came, and they loved when he went. Not only because they could get back to a normal routine, but they always learned something. They always got wiser from it, but he was really challenging them all the time. He was, trying to find out how can you use the technique, how far can you get with it. And he didn't, like a lot of artists, just leave a drawing or a sketch and had it made print. For Jorn, the print was as original an artwork as any of his paintings. Always, I'm sure you're all here because you appreciate prints, but in general, there is this difference in if you have paintings on your wall or you have prints. There's always this kind of reproduction which makes it somehow a little removed from the artist. With Jorn, it's not like that. Absolutely not. He was there in the process, and he probably followed every print. I met one of the son of one of his Italian printers who really tell this wonderful story, which explains a little about how Jorn worked. It was an Italian Milan. They were doing a poster for an exhibition in Venice. It was supposed that Jorn was supposed to come in the morning, on the Monday morning, and they would have till noon to finish this project. Of course, Jorn was late, but the son of this printer, now a very large print factory and was also a publisher, said that he remembered his father came home Friday afternoon, totally worn out, but as happy as ever, because he said, now, this was a night, I had this Nordic artist coming, Danish artist, and, we made 100 proof prints, and every time it was large, it was posters, every time we had to wash the plates, and so it was a nightmare, but we did the most wonderful we ever did, so it was worth it, and the son still remembered, how the father was emotionally attached to this process, though of course there had been 8 people working in the workshop, it was had been an economical nightmare, but the result is wonderful. And I think this is the process that somehow which if I may return to that you somehow see these curious experiments, and you can follow that somehow.
Yeah, I think when working with artists now, I had the luck that Jorn was alive when I got these, so we could basically make our own decisions about practical things. So we started out, since we didn't know how I haven't worked with linoleum that old, so we didn't know how that would hold up for printing and so on. So we actually printed a set of all 52 with a spoon, because that is like the gentlest way you can do it. It showed up to be quite laborious because linoleum has a kind of rough surface that's hard to get to print really well. So we ended up buying a small hydraulic press where you kind of pump two plates together, which again gives you a very gentle pressure rather than using a roller press where you can squash your plate in a second if you do something wrong. We did that, but going through the first prints, it was quite clear that I mean, personally, I mean, I've looked at a lot of prints and I've worked with a lot of artists, so you get this feel of when there's something going on. I mean, you can see that immediately. You don't have to kind of analyze it or anything. It's just, you can see that here's something that's actually going on in the prints. And when you look at these prints, it's very clear. I think a lot of them were made, I understood from Jacob, a lot were made like for as illustrations to text, to poets, to poems or to songs. I think there's some that were like for Christmas songs. They're very irreverent. There's a lot of kind of naughty priests around, I think. But the way you can see he's using like the part, some of the plates that are like part cut out to make room for text, and the way he's using those kind of weird forms of plates very, very effectively to very kind of dramatic. I mean, some of the effects are very much like the early German expressionist kind of, especially the movie sets. And the way of isolating like a head in that way, so it's like a free floating egg or something. You can just see that he's visually, he has a very easy way of dealing with visual effects. And another thing that was quite clear was his political engagement. I mean, there's a lot which belonged to that time in the 33 till 39 was like pretty wild days. And he came from a small town to Copenhagen and wanted to be an artist, which at that time was sure starvation. I mean, and he grabbed sort of the medium, which was the propaganda print medium by excellence. So there was a lot of like stories built into it, and they're all, for me, these very personal things. And they're very fresh things, and it's sort of like even though these are printed years after he was there, prints have this authority that they're kind of fresh. They kind of travel through time a lot better than many paintings or many more complex artworks, because they have this immediate reading, which personally I love a lot. And they have also, you mentioned this, the presence of the artist in the process, and in my experience, I think a lot of what the artists like about being very present in the process is that they do get surprises. Like, it's a process where you lose control rather than, I mean, you by experience you get control. You can sort of think something and you can then on the plate work on it to try to get this or that effect, but in the end you're going to get surprises. I think for some artists, in my personal experience, it's probably 1 or 2 out of 10 artists that is super exciting. They really like it. The rest, who, thank God, usually don't make very many prints, they just find it annoying. I mean, it's like, they look at it and say, why is it not what I wanted? But with artists like Jorn, like Kirkeby, many artists I work with, there's this constant playing with the material and looking for interesting accidents, basically.
Especially Kirkeby, I remember he said that every print he made was a kind of gift for himself. The moment it went on paper wow, then, you know, this is the gift. This is really an exciting experience to see what actually happened after he'd been scratching in this plate on his travels. So I think that's right. You can see, if I may return to these prints, you're right that he had some projects in mind also. I think he was very, he was communist. He had said he had two fathers. At that time, his own father, real father, died when he was 14. This is why he went to Silkeborg together with his mother and his siblings. And there, two persons took him in. One was this workers' leader. It was an anarchist, communist, who had been in Russia. Was very well known in Denmark in these days. And he took Jorn in and gave him what Jorn called his social consciousness. And then there was an artist in Silkeborg who gave him his artistic consciousness. And of course you can see the political side here very clearly. There's no doubt that Jorn was planning a book, an illustrated book. He was always thinking on how to get out in a wider scale. His paintings, he lived from them, but the graphic works, this is where a lot of his love was, because he knew he could share that with a lot of people, the people that for whom he also made the museum, the common people. And he was planning a novel, an illustrated novel at this time. And we know that they might turn up someday, that he had made some more, probably also some of these were sent to a Copenhagen publisher together, probably with the manuscript, which has then disappeared, but the prints are fortunately preserved. We tried, when we found them, I tried to get, see, is there a story somehow, but that has been impossible to recreate, unfortunately. And then you see his different places also, and you're right, some of them are probably for this Boy Scouts magazine. Some of the religious paintings or the prints are probably meant as illustrations for one of the workers' magazines. And then there's this story that somehow is there behind this novel. And I think the idea for this came because we know that when he was about this age, and perhaps even a little younger, he borrowed some illustrated novels, some Russian books, from this friend of his communist anarchist friend, and he exhibited them in the library of Silkeborg. And there's a beautiful description in the local newspaper, I think it's from 1933, which says that the young student will receive people and show them around in the exhibition in the library of these books. And this was Asger Jorn, who was sitting in the library showing people around. We don't know how many came, and he was supposed to make money from getting a few kroners from each visitor. I think this is where the starvation started from his side. And then of course you have the very late, which is a little out of the removed from the late, most of it, the late print, which is from the period just after he arrived in Paris. Actually, he went to Paris as in 36. He arrived in this fall of 36 and stayed until 39, a little on and off. But you see there, he totally changes his style. He gets absorbed by this international environment in Paris in the late 1930s. He never copies, but you see, of course, the reminiscence of several of the artists of those days. Never copied. He always, took his impressions in and made his own works afterwards. I think also technically you see him evolve. I think at some point you said you can see he's a total amateur in the beginning.
Yeah, it's very clear. I mean, I didn't have a date on any of them, but you see some of the prints that are kind of ill helpless, like he hasn't grasped the possibilities of playing with these like pretty stark black and white compositions, but very quickly he gets a fantastic grip on it. I mean, you can find many like the print up there, the woman combing her hair. It's so crude, it's so simple, but it's like really, really elegant. And there are very many examples of the way he sort of disposes like the page and the kind of tips things and makes sort of radical compositions. It's just very clear that he's just learning at an amazing speed.
But I can tell you, I'm sure that if I went to a flea market and saw some of his early paintings, I would go past them and never believe that they were the works of Asger Jorn, even though I'm supposed to know that. I would notice. So, but I think it's for us it's interesting to see this also. He has a humor, wonderful sense of humor, also this ironic approach to a lot of things that you find later. I mean, if you had to. Even he's very, very young at this point. The studies of the priests are really funny. There's this portrait of a girl seen from the side on the mid right in the first group of four. We knew about that. I mean, this is one of these wonderful details that you suddenly realize. Because he made a portrait of each of his siblings, and we know all of them, but this one we didn't know. We knew it because this sister saw the print he made, and she tore it apart and said, "I'm not that ugly." And this is the one. I mean, and then suddenly you have this connection to way back to history. I mean, not only was the suitcase a revelation, you suddenly have all these details that suddenly fit in when you have 50 works turning up, which all it was at one time. And there are several others. Then, of course, the ex libris of this Else Rasmussen, the girlfriend that he definitely was in love with or fascinated by. There was certainly also an ex libris. I don't know if it's here.
I don't think it is.
No, from his the leader of his Boy Scout team. I mean, and is this important? Yes, it's really important because Jorn had this ability to cooperate. I mean, as an artist, is unique in this sense because he was. A lot of artists will sit in the studios and they will look up. They're trying to find inspiration. Jorn was always cooperating with someone. If it was master printers, if it was authors, it was a group of 20 other artists, or it was a left-wing French author, whatever, always cooperation, always trying to see how we can together get further, how we can develop together instead of thinking that you have to find out everything yourself. Cooperating, the Cobra Group is one thing, International Situationist Group is another one of this group where he was the driving force in many ways. And you can see it all the time. I think all in all probably 12, 15 different groups, larger groups, and then these working with specific craftsmen, authors, other artists, or whatever. And I think that comes back to this small ex libris, the portrait of the Boy Scout leader that is not here, and which is not as an artwork. It's very interesting, but historically, understanding how this came to be, a lot of it came from this. Boy Scout, but the learning how to cooperate, that definitely comes from this Boy Scout thing. they should sponsor us. They do not, unfortunately, but we have a cooperation with them anyway. So this is also part of it, all these details that you find along the way.
I have a curiosity about the portrait of the sister. Is that one of the very early ones?
It's very early. Yes, it's probably one of the first.
That's one of the clubs here once.
And this one of the, I think also in the...
Like compared to that one, it's like miles apart.
You can understand why she tore it apart. I mean, this is absolutely... I have no hard feelings there, but it turned out. And some of the others are better, I think. But no, I'm not that ugly. It's a beautiful remark. So... And of course he experimented with all techniques simply, and driving the printers crazy. He was always trying to see how far can we cross this border. How much can the technique give us? And I think you also touch upon that. You can see suddenly he understands how the idea of the graphic. What you can do with black and white. It's suddenly it's there. Then he got that far, and with the printers, when he was doing litos, it was also. I mean, how can you work with the colors? How refined can you be? Famous experiments with marble balls that he would pour printers on the stone. He would dip them in color and let them run over the plate. Lots of these difficult experiments also along the way. And you see him cut also the wood. I mean, the wood cuts he would do. Yeah, I think
the main wood cuts that you talked about is a fantastic series.
Yes.
It's really.
Well, I'm sure that several of the artists you work with, they don't want to work on that for weeks. I mean, there are more important things to do in their life. But for Jorn, it was important that he was part of the artistic process all along the way. And I think that was the amazing thing. We haven't found out who this gentleman is. I mean, it
doesn't look like somebody he liked a lot.
No. But we never know.
But again, when you look at it, the way it's floating, but also the empty glasses, there's nothing there.
It's like a balloon going up. Yes.
It's like
and there are many details also. This is what we don't realize in his paintings. Things just blow up. It is one explosion and then out of the studio. But he would work a lot, every detail was counting. In his paintings we know that he knew exactly where he wanted to go. The problem was how to get there. So he would continuously work on his paintings. And you see this sense of the detail is already here. I mean, there was this very, very young, totally inexperienced artist who even, I think, he was 20 when the local newspaper said that there was also this exhibition where he contributed to there were works, and there were even studied works by this young artist from Silkeborg, and we were happy to see his works. We don't hope we see any of them anymore. I mean, he wasn't really. The surroundings were that helpful in those days. But of course, you can also see how he was always fighting for a higher goal. This is also, I mean, it's not too much to say. You can see it here that that politically it's clear that he was fighting, but also artistically, and that's probably one of the things that really always was challenged to him, that he wanted to do. He wanted a goal with everything he made. Was not satisfied just with having success. Success for him didn't mean anything. It did enable him to do something, but that was the money. He could help others or create something. Makes one of his huge, crazy almost. projects. He would finance that with his success, but success as such didn't mean anything. He was curious. That was what meant something. That it's also clear here. I think that he goes somewhere all the time. Unfortunately, we're not able to make to see which print comes first. I mean, it would be wonderful if there was a small date or something like that other artists understood that how helpful it would be for the victims and directors. But so yes,
Can I ask a
but
question?
yeah.
You mentioned that some of them have been published in magazines.
Yes.
So there you can find a date. But do you think he ever made prints himself, printed them himself, or did he go to these book printers or magazine printers and ask them to print them for him? Do you have any idea?
But I heard that he did a lot of printing in the graphic school of the Art Academy in
But that was
Copenhagen.
later.
But was that later?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know, Dieter just heard that he posted a lot. But all of these plates had ink on them at least, so they had all been printed at some point. So I would suspect, since you can print them by yourself, I mean, a spoon is very useful. And a small roller is also something you can, I mean, you need a setup that fits in the cigar box to do it. So I would just guess that he would have done it. I mean, the book printer would not be very happy for somebody coming in and wanting one print of the thing where you would have to reset the print. I mean, an automatic press would need setting and so on, so it will take him an hour maybe to get ready to do one print. So I think the simple practical solution would be that he would have a small roller and a little bit of ink and do the proofing, the test proofs that he would send to his girlfriend or whatever, or send to a publisher, and then also the fact that there are no other prints. I mean, that no prints exist of them suggests that there are very, very few of them. I mean, that he probably just did one or two.
So the book printer would have gotten a proof rather than the plate?
No, I mean, you don't. I mean, the book printer for lino cuts, that would usually be an automatic press that what's it called, the fly catcher, the one that, a small automatic press, but it doesn't make sense to set up a press for something you can do with a spoon. I mean, it would just take the book printer, you would have to pay the book printer too much money for it.
But you're right, I think all of these prints were only made in one copy. I mean, it was only proof copies, and then he probably sent some of them sent a copy to, or the only copy. This is why we didn't know about them. The only copy to this printer, this publisher in Copenhagen, who didn't return the manuscript and the prints. But later he did a lot of prints himself. He had a small, but we actually had a small press, which later went to the teacher school in Silkeborg. We got it a couple of years ago. The small one he used for experiments, but later he would make most of the prints together with prints. And every time there was an edition of anything, he would do it together with someone.
I would say also the way these prints are made, it doesn't look like you would have the patience to do them and then wait until there was a chance to go to a book printer and have one print done. I mean, he would basically do it and then he would check it out, and then he would stop whenever he'd seen it.
And this material is later. I mean, this is
added. Okay.
This is definitely from the 60s. He didn't use, because when I saw them, I said, wow, they all were used for printing. But this is definitely the brother who at some point thought that he was going to save his, as a pensioner, he would have swell time and make a lot of money from this. But I think he stopped. He made a few prints, and then he simply stopped because he realized that he had probably stepped over the line what he could allow himself to do. So this is why some of them look as they have been through a press, but that was later.
Okay.
So,
There have definitely been, I mean, the wood has been for a long time in the basement because it stinks.
yes, it's pure. It's pure basement perfume.
You know what year this one is?
It's definitely 33, 34. It's very early, because a lot of these, in those days you were, or at least in Denmark, as an artist you were either totally right-wing or left-wing, and 99% of the artists, they were left-wing. I mean, they were members of the Communist Party or other left-wing organizations. And what you can see, it's also interesting that the fight against Nazism is very early. I mean, it's a very early point that they see, that the danger coming, and your mate and other artists also from this period made these anti-right-wing prints and try to raise the discussion with them also. And some of them even shows the street battles between you have the communists there, but I think there's also one with a Nazi. I think it's even a soldier. They are very political, and you're of course. Kept his engagement in what was happening. It was either you were on one side on the other. Things were black and white in those days simply, and it was a struggle. If you were an artist, you were poor, you were like the workers, you had a very nothing to live from really. So and this is always see how did these artists survive. It was this myth that they had no money. Nobody had any money in those days. I mean, it was the difference between a worker and the artist wasn't that big. I mean, they didn't have any money simply. So it was a fight in a way. I love this thing where the priest. You have to see that later. That one where the priest and the widow, which is, and when you then learn more about Jorn, you see there's always this irony, this humor, and the priest is of course trying to console the widow, but his hand is getting a little too far, And there are a lot of these beautiful details when you start finding them. I think it's that's one of the these early prints. Even if you were not that enthusiastic in the beginning, but you have to admit you were very enthusiastic later. I mean, I was so happy. I felt because I was then not the only one who was able to see the quality in these prints. And it was, we know it's 650 different prints, I think. And suddenly you get 52 more. I mean, it's not bad as an acquisition for 1 year in the annual report from the museum director. So I'm very happy you did this, and you also did it very well. It's dangerous because I think what I was told immediately was that this lino is extremely fragile. You can always pulverize. You can totally ruin it if you add too much pressure. It's a natural material, and when it gets this old, it can break. But I think you, until now,
we're finished.
they're still there. So that also, a lot of people said don't. I mean, you will ruin them. It's dangerous. But I think with your hand, I had to. This is why we called you, of course. That you had the feeling. It really, it's not that easy to do it. And I think that's also the result. I was very really impressed also that you also had it, understood how to get the best out of them. I mean, because also when I saw the plates, some of them look okay. Of course, it's something for me as a museum director of the museum that Asger Jorn founded to find these plates. But is there quality behind it also? Isn't it only? I mean, we do have a few paintings in the basement, in the archives. We have this portrait of a red Indian, which Jorn did as he was 16 years old. I mean, they are some of these are connected with this wonderful painting that will never come on show, I'm sure. So, but I mean, it's also seeing the prints. Yes.
Did you decide together the paper size?
No, I simply left that. That's we have a professional in the room, so I think that's it was Niels' task to decide that. No, I was.
What we decided was to make, since there was a large group and there was going to be put in a box, we would need a size that's on one size fits all, kind of. Because otherwise, since we're printing on thin Japanese paper, it's impossible to handle if they're different sizes. They're going to get messed up completely every time we go through them. So we found a size that wasn't too big, but it had to be big enough for that one and for, I think, that one. And then we played with the proportion until we thought that they all could look reasonably good on it. But it's always a trade-off when you have a lot of different sizes of plates and you still want to fit it into something compact.
Now you have decided edition size for a posthumous edition.
Yes.
If it sells out and there is lots of interest, will you do a second edition?
That's not up for me to do, at least. They belong to the museum.
Yeah,
we made 16 and I think that's
But you're absolutely right, because also, can you allow yourself to do that kind of edition at all? Before we went to this, of course, we had this discussion. It's a very, I'm sure that others would have decided differently. What the idea was actually that we wanted to preserve them. I mean, this is only having like this would make, of course, make an idea, but if we were ever to show them, we wanted to have a paper version. And then what we decided on was actually that the reason why we did an edition was to say that this is, there will be museums that where a copy of these works would be an important addition to their Jorn collection, where it would make sense to have copies. So we did share them, and of course they are the paper stamped, so you have no doubt that it's a modern or a later copy. This is very important, I think, that we don't try to pretend that it's printed by Jorn or in his age. That is very clear, very big actually stamp or paper, what do you call it? Pressed into the paper. That shows that this is, it's a later piece. No, I don't think we would do a later edition. We don't do that with any of Jorn's prints, even though we have especially the plates, many of the plates for the etchings. I mean, we did that to enable museums, collectors, to have a copy, so it's also preserved other places. But a second edition, no, I'm quite sure we wouldn't do that. We never did that, as far as I know. Not my place, at least, with any of his prints, though it's possible. You know that from other. I mean, if you go to the 19th century, some of these beautiful Pissarro and other impressionist prints from those days, they were made 2, 3, 5, and also, of course, Rembrandt and many others to meet the demand of the prints. I don't think we would do that. Not with any of Jorn's prints. He did many from every print made. There are normally many copies. I don't think we can compete with that. With the colors, they will be impossible to find again. We don't want to do this copy. We did an edition here with a very exact purpose, and we wouldn't do any anymore. That's I'm quite sure about that. I don't think that would also be crossing a line. And we did actually a very small edition. We were discussing a large edition, but I think the edition we did here is really right because it enables some collectors to get copies and also relevant museums that have major collections of Jorn's mapping works.
I think, by the way, your question also gets to like the whole idea of, I mean, we have in nowadays where prints are less understood by the general public, you very often get this confusion about original prints, since the print usually exists in edition. How can they be original? And this is kind of explains it. This is what Jorn did and touched himself. That is what we printed from it. But that is what Jorn considered the artwork. This is just, this object is not particularly interesting to look at for anybody but a specialist. And that is like this term original in printmaking doesn't mean that there's one of them. It means that that is what was intended by the artist. That was the artwork that was intended by the artist, and there's no the rest. This is just middle material. This is just the form made to produce the actual artwork.
Yeah, but he may have wanted to print it in red instead of
that
black.
That is quite possible. That is quite possible.
But artist in
but when you look at the motifs at the time, lino cut was basically always black. Almost.
And the ones with the comments.
But he might have had other ideas. I know what he thought.
We know other early prints and they're always black and white. But of course, it's taking away to be red color. I can see that, but I don't think we'll get that far. But we can discuss that another time. Do you have any questions? Please feel free to ask. Also,
you also
in German.
Just ask us anything. When we want to look at this.
Yeah.
I am curious because you said several times that these were done for magazines like the Boy Scout magazine you keep mentioning, and yet the dating remains ambiguous. Has the museum sought out copies of the periodicals in which these have appeared? Do you have copies of those where you can see where the text entered into the image and things like that, or is this all hypothetical?
No, we don't have any copies of when he used combined text and picture, unfortunately. We do have several other prints of this period are known. They're mainly printed together or in a little more clumsy way combined with text. I think some of the prints are very elegant. You're really curious to see how a final page would have looked. Many of the earlier ones are a little more rough. They're a little more primitive in these left-wing magazine periodicals that he. You see, it's quite crude. A lot of it. So no, we would be very curious to find just one page where he really showed, because I think that one is wonderful. A couple of others where you see, wow, he really is working with the whole page. It's this combination that he, as a very young man, is trying to work with. The ones that are preserved from that we knew already, they are a little more crude. And there's also, he did something for the schools magazine. They're also probably a little earlier than the ones here. No, we don't have any example of this combination of the better works or better artworks together with letters.
Well, can I ask a question?
Yes.
You mentioned before that sometimes for his work, or I think his work, I don't remember exactly, there are like sources in literature, poems, etc. In this case, there are any traces, or is like all those works as like this black suitcase, or I don't know what was the color of the suitcase, was like there are only intuitions about political situation, or there are something more what you found behind that?
Well, I think, if I understood your question right, I think that the political things are made for these magazines. We have very, very little, knowledge about what they were used or meant for. Unfortunately, we know these different periodicals that he contributed to, and we know that he then, he was onto something, and then he got ambitious and wanted to have it printed, this novel or whatever it was, printed. But somehow, most of the letters from this period have disappeared. Only from his girlfriend, and at the later times he found the letters, returned them. But most of we have a lot of archival material from later period, but from this period, very little. I mean, it's really, and this, I really, to tell the truth, I wanted to write something about it, but it was very difficult to find the sources. Any connection, the few letters preserved were already known, had been described. So it's, somehow they are on their own, most of these works. Did that answer your question? Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Okay, I think you should feel free and take a look at the prints. I can